Hello WotV fans, I'm Jackie Fox, and in this video we're going to be looking at Final Fantasy X-2 and the YRP units, Yuna, Rikku, and Paine. And Paine is going to be our free unit here, and she has the prestigious role of being in the #1 team in this data, which is pretty cool, especially considering that there really aren't that many people playing her. The most people are playing Rikku, and situationally I would say that she's probably the strongest of these three characters. Paine seems to have some promise, but I also don't really have the data to back that up because her teams feel more like outliers. I don't know that she's been tested enough to really have some strong things to say about her, and maybe she's kind of hit or miss as well. Yuna also I have some issues with in terms of generally how good she is as a unit or how good the teams she is on are. However, she definitely has some big upsides in some interesting ways, and I've got to say, out of all three of these units, she feels the most like glue. She sticks around on a bunch of different teams. Either of these characters, while you'll probably not see Rikku and Paine together, I saw combinations of these two, of either Yuna and Rikku or Yuna and Paine all throughout this data. So, I want to take a moment to remind you all to like and subscribe, especially if you like this content, because as far as I know, I'm the only WotV's content creator who is actually looking at this data like this and drawing conclusions from it, and that's really good because it gives us a data-based, facts-based thing to judge all of the just things that we hear from other content creators through. Like, this is an untapped resource that I wish more people were looking at this level, but with all of that being said, what combos appeared in the data? What things seem to be working for people on the JP side using these units? For Rikku, who is the most popular character here by far, it is resoundingly to use her with Mont and or Soddly. Using her with Mont and Soddly is seen by most as the way to go for this really powerful pseudo-evasion team that, while it is pseudo-evasion, it's not necessarily going really hard into evasion in a lot of ways, although the vision cards for this team should hit that pretty heavily. It's really maximizing the potential for evasion with characters like Ash and Mont, with Soddly, who have good support for it, but like by themselves aren't evasion characters in the same way that Rikku is. And that makes her kind of a niche and specific unit, and while she has the most popular teams here, and maybe she's the Soddly, Ash and Mont Rikku team is so overused that I think it's one of the most popular teams that I've ever covered. So in that situation she's really good, but she does tend to underperform Yuna. And again, I have some issues with Yuna because I think she's really important for enabling a different type of gameplay that hasn't been available and making that much better. And if the judgment is based on how much running Yuna can improve certain teams, she's far and away the best unit here, and she really is one of the more versatile of the three. But at the same time, I'm not sure that those teams were in a good place before Yuna, necessarily, which means that they're only in a pretty good place after Yuna. You're not really adding on to something that's already particularly strong. That being said, Yuna works well with, as I said, Rikku or Paine, but she also works mainly with other ranged units, because that extra follow-up damage, she's basically a good version of Irving. And I think Irving has potential, and I was sure to pick out a team with Irving on it for this data set, and it actually did do pretty well in a specific way, because I think that this kind of follow-up damage and all-gunner strategy, as we talked about in the last video, works really well on defense, but maybe isn't the best offensive strategy. And these teams tend to underperform generally when you look at them like that, but we're going to see at least two of them which is even more than the last video where we were focusing on a gunner, more specifically, that are doing really well on defense because of that. Because they're just stacking in so much follow-up damage and so much range damage that things aren't even getting in range to deal damage to them, and therefore they're able to take out 2 and 3 teams per day, which is just really, really impressive to be able to do consistently. And then finally with Paine, if you're not already running her with Yuna, which is fairly common, you're also definitely running her with Cypher, and she also makes a pretty good, like, Yuna, Paine, and Cypher ended up being a pretty decent team here as well. In terms of partners, I've said it in basically every video that I've done one of these. Basically, no matter who you are, Luciel is going to help stabilize your team and make you better. And I would say at least 2 of these characters tend to work out pretty well with Cypher. I'm not... And in theory, like Rikku, if you could figure the vision cards out for it, Cypher has more evasion potential, at least, than Ashe and Mont. So I could see him... And there's already, like, evasion teams that are built around him in a very similar way to Ashe and Mont, and sometimes those things overlap, so I think Cypher could actually work with any of these characters particularly well. So interesting thing from maybe the last collaboration, or the last mainline, well, I guess Tactics came back. Like before that, okay, yeah, I think that was, so pretty recent character, pretty recent limited character. Number 1 team on offense is going to include this character, and also another surprising limited star, Vivi. Vivi's finally back in the action. This was a really, really strong offensive team with one of the highest, or one of the closest to 6-star offensive records I've seen in a video like this. This was just a standout offense team, and it's kind of ridiculous. It didn't do quite as well on defense. However, it did manage to at least place in a tie for 5th on defense, so that's not terrible. This was our all-around best team for anything tested in the video. So again, Paine may have some potential, it's just there aren't a lot of people really using her and testing her, and also this includes some other limited characters. It's an all-limited team spanning 3 different collaborations. That being said, all the characters here supporting her were really good in the best of their collaborations, so maybe it's their added power that's doing a lot here. Next best offensive team was Cloud, Advent Children, Cloud, Yuna, and New Jaden. So, a lot of range damage, basically using Cloud as their bulky dude to be able to take damage and draw fire so that they can kind of plow through things with range damage. If you keep Yuna in the middle, then she's adding to Cloud's damage as he moves forward, which by itself could be indomitable because he already sweeps through people really easily. Adding on an extra hit to that could just be the thing that pushes him over the edge, but also being able to add on to Jaden's damage. So this team is a pretty good example of why, generally speaking, 2-gunner teams are better than 3-gunner teams. And this one is probably a lot more stable and overwhelming in some ways that make it better, at least on offense. We didn't see this team do nearly as well on defense. In 3rd place on offense, we have Fina, Yuna, and Rikku. So 2 ranged light characters, one of them with healing and an evasive character. This is probably a pretty rushy strategy. I would imagine if you can keep Yuna close enough to Rikku, Rikku is going to get out very quickly. And also be a really great midfield distraction. If people think they can hit her, then they aren't going to try to run past and get to Yuna or anything. They're going to try to engage with her, and she's just going to kind of give them the slip, while even if she does end up taking damage, you've got Fina there to heal her from range as well. While both of those characters, if she's, not being hit by things, and Fina doesn't have to heal, she can also support with damage, debuffs, and all sorts of stuff at range. This is actually probably the best Fina team that I've seen in a while, and it actually did even better on defense as well. So there have been a lot of points over the last couple of months since Fina came out that there really wasn't a good team to put her on, in that usually when she was good on a team, that team was slightly better with someone else anyway, so you wouldn't use her. This seems to be kind of her space. Unfortunately, it involves also getting Yuna and Rikku. This was one of the better teams listed today. And then that team also came in 4th place by swapping out Fina for Luciel. And again, what I was saying, the biggest hurdle that Fina has had to overcome is that, like, 9 times out of 10, if you swap her for Luciel, even if you're breaking some elemental synergy, even if you're breaking job synergies and stuff to do it, which you would be in both cases here, it's still usually better to run Luciel. However, in this data, switching Luciel out, at least on this team, did make it underperform a little bit on offense. Still wasn't in the top 5, so number 4 finish ain't bad. And then finally we have an all Rikku team, or at least one that doesn't include any of the other YRP characters, teaming up with Agrius and Ashenmont for a ice and earth based team. That this one isn't very evasive. It's kind of a mixed strategy team. It's interesting, and maybe that's part of why people have trouble teching around it. Also, Agrius is there to kind of maybe hopefully draw off some potential wind units that might be lurking and waiting to do bad things to Ashenmont and Rikku, especially someone like Shurika. But this came in 5th on offense. On defense is where we start to see our newest strategy shining, and actually the strategy that I was talking about in the previous video, the one team that can push the Jaden-Yuna combo into the point where it's doing enough damage that it can get multiple defends without really taking damage or even being in danger of it. Melnia, Yuna, and Jaden was by far number 1 on defense in this data. I used 2 of the same days as sample points, refreshing with some newer data, and in that newer data, this team solidified with another 2.8 stars, which put its average, which was like 2.25 in the previous video, all the way up to 2.53, which I noted in the previous video, that's really, really high for a defensive score. You know, approaching 3, getting even above 2 is quite astounding. And a number of teams, there was a lot of competition. In fact, 5th place, the tie for 5th place, is at exactly the average of 2 defends per fight. And that is usually the high water mark. That's usually 1st and 2nd place territory. These units do really well on defense. I don't know if I'm impressing that on you well enough, but specifically Yuna does really well on defense. The second team, we're also going to see Fina, Yuna, and Rikku. Rikku also showing that she can do well on defense, although this is going to be her only time showing up on the defensive charts for this video. All of her other teams, which were, and logically because a lot of her best teams and teams she's most used on are mono earth, and those are just easy to counter on defense, while they're way more likely to go on a streak on offense. So, you know, it's not Riku's fault necessarily. It's the fact that people are mainly just using her on mono earth teams, this being the farthest from a mono earth team that you can really get while still having Rikku on it. Next, we're going to see some more Yuna. We've got Cypher, Yuna, and Paine. So we're also getting another mixed team with 2 of our characters on it. This one did quite well. And then, in 4th place, right before the 2-way tie for 5th, we have a unit that I didn't expect to be on this list at all, or to ever see on any of these lists again. Actually, 2 characters that I didn't expect to see any of these lists ever again, but I think Yuna just kind of pushes them over the edge to make them work. Summer Jaden, that's right, not Commander Jaden, Summer Jaden, the wind Jaden that like no one has ever used. That guy. Irvine, the Final Fantasy VIII collaboration gunner who also has follow-up damage effects, who can follow up other people's hits with his own, just like Yuna can. So we're going to be doubling down on that idea. I would imagine you put Yuna and Irvine on either side, slot 1 and 2. You put Summer Jaden in the middle. You have them both rush to buff him. Maybe he's the third fastest unit. And then in a turn or two, they're going to be near him, and he's going to be moving forward maybe with them. Once he deals damage, he's going to have 2 follow-up hits from both of them, with Yuna and Irvine potentially being able to follow up each other's attacks as well. And this just provides seemingly, even though 2 out of 3 characters here have not been considered top tier or super playable, even when they released in some cases. I mean, I guess Summer Jaden had a moment. Irvine, no one really ever seriously cared about. Even though in theory, the ability that makes him and Yuna kind of unique as gunners, in theory that is a very powerful ability that should be able to bring gunner teams back by helping them push past this threshold in a way that even Melnia can't, and even Commander Jaden can't. And honestly, I think that probably the best version of this team would be Commander Jaden, Irvine, and Yuna, just to push all of this to its logical extreme. But I didn't see that team, so I couldn't put it on the list. Somebody get out there and do it, I guess is what I'm saying. And then in our 2-way tie for 5th place, we had 2 very similar teams in that both of them contain Cypher and Paine. The third unit was Vivi or Angela, 2 very similar characters themselves, so this is a very, very similar team built off of that Paine plus Cypher combo I was telling you about earlier, and just throwing in some supplemental heavy magic to go with that. And I would say Vivi is probably the best into anti-magic, as I think his stun is basically guaranteed against anyone with high faith. On the other hand, Angela is better into teams that have more HP drain capabilities, because you can directly counter that. So these are teched for slightly different scenarios, however they are both good teams that fundamentally kind of do the same things. So with that, we're definitely going to look at like the top 10, which is going to be the top 11 teams, because there's a tie for 9th. But in number 1, first on offense, 5th on defense, we have Vivi, Cypher, and Paine. So Paine is coming in first on this list. So the offensive average here is 5 2/3 stars per day. That is utterly ridiculous. One of the highest scores I've ever seen for offense. This team was very good. And then on defense, it averaged 2 defends per day, which is, again, usually first or second place on defense material. It's only because the competition for defense was so heavy with these characters that it actually came at 5th place. Good example of a team that really rose above on defense. 3rd place on offense. 2nd place on defense, we have Yuna, Fina, and Rikku, 2 ranged units and an evade character. This team had an off day, both on offense and on defense, where its scores were average, but outside of that, its scores were pretty consistently exceptional. 4.9 stars average on offense, which again is pretty good. 3rd place. 2.2 defends on average, though, is generally any other week that would have been first on defense. It did only come in 2nd, though, so I guess that's pretty good. The team that came in first, Melnia, Yuna, and Jaden, 3.17 stars on offense. This is not a team or a strategy that I think works well on offense. This is a really good team for catching people off guard on defense. because it averaged 2.53 defense per day, which is utterly ridiculous. Imagine a wall of this team, it would be staggering. Another team that did well on defense, and again, you can see how strong the defensive performances are. They pretty much dictated who scored the highest on this list, instead of letting offense dictate that, as it sometimes does. Cypher, Yuna, and Paine. Again, I think Cypher could work well on many or all of these teams. I don't have any data to back up him being good with Rikku, but I really think that since Rikku tends to work pretty well with these demi-evasive characters, she could definitely work well with Cypher. In 5th place, we have Luciel, Battlefield Ketchup, alongside Yuna and Rikku, who just seem to be a really good combination with each other. This team came in 4th place on offense, with an average of 4.73 stars. And, I mean, it had a pretty good defensive performance. It and the next team we're going to talk about both averaged 1.87 defense, which is pretty close to 2. That's certainly an above average performance. Very good. So this is a team that worked pretty well on offense and defense. 5th place on offense and 6th place generally, we have Agrius, Ashenmont, and Rikku, which is kind of like the popular meme team for Rikku, but with Agrius as a kicker instead of Sodley, which also might be easier for people to achieve as Agrius was a free unit recently. This team got 4.53 stars on average, which is, again, just a little bit below 4th place, as you would expect, but still a pretty good performance. Next up in 6th place, also 5th place on defense, or tied for 5th place on defense, we have Force of Habit there, Angela, Cypher, and Paine. Pretty strong combination. These guys average just over 4 points on offense, 4.1 stars per day, with 2 defense, which is, again, pretty good score. Next up, we have 2 variations, really like 3 if you skip the team. One of the teams is tied for 9th, but in 8th, 9th, and 10th position, we have 3 variations on basically the same team. The one that came out on top was Sodley, Luciel, and Rikku. This ended up being the strongest team. Generally, it had a pretty good defensive performance, 1.77 defense, 4.13 on offense, so not terribly bad there. Sodley, Ashenmont, and Rikku, which is by far the number 1 team, 932 uses between offense and defense in just 1 day. Astounding amount of people using this team. It did a little bit better on offense, 4.27 stars, but a little bit worse on defense, 1.63 defense. I think defense is a pretty important indicator of general success. It's probably the better thing to think about, when you're applying this data to other formats in this game. Tied for 9th place, we also had a team that almost no one is using, which came 2nd on offense. This is Cloud, Yuna, and the new Jaden. 2 days in a row, this team averaged 6 stars on offense. It actually ended up with an average of 5.17 stars. Anytime you can get above 5 on offense, that's a very good performance. So that was pretty good. Defense, though, was really bad. It averaged 1.33, and that defensive performance was so below average, it really pulled it down in the rankings all the way into 9th place. But again, 2nd place on offense, so this is definitely not an unusable team. You just don't want to play it on defense. And then the final Rikku team, Ashenmont, Luciel, and Rikku. This team just kind of underperformed not only the non-Luciel version, but the Luciel-Sodley combo version, just by a little bit. Actually, it did better on offense, 4.43 stars per day, but just about 1.5 defense, which was the weakest of all 3 teams. Just kind of let the team down on defense, but maybe the strongest iteration of the 3 on offense. So interesting. Again, while certain teams may generally underperform others, if you use them in the right side or the right format in guild battle, they tend to be a lot better. And then we have 4 slightly underperforming unit teams rounding out the lower data. One of the more interesting ones, Summer Jaden, Irving, and Yuna, this is the one that has all of the extra chances to proc ranged follow-up damage. This team could wipe out a number of people before even people got to it, but if people do get to it, it's very weak. One of the days it scored 1 on defense because of this, which is, well, there's only one person using this, right? They're using it on offense and defense, so basically this one person had a bad day with it on defense. The other 2 days, though, it got 2.7 and 2.5 stars. So, while there's a lot of variability in how it was being used on defense, it generally did really well with 2.07 defense per day, which, again, most days would be number 1 if not number 2. The problem is it very consistently only scored 3 stars on offense, and that's just not a really great performance. Although, again, with this being one person using it, for all I know, they get their first attack and they say, you know what, I'm probably not going to do well in that second attack, so I'm just not going to waste the attack. Which generally I would assume people don't do. It doesn't seem like people do that very often, but also in higher level, sometimes if you are both going to clear each other, it does come down to who had the most free attacks left, and, you know, attacking someone to not get any stars, sometimes that can be a bit of a faux pas in higher level format. So, for all I know, this guy's in like a top 10 guild, and he's playing this as a curveball, and he just happens to be okay at using it on offense, but it works pretty well in defense. But the other the other 3 teams, I'm not really going to talk about. I felt like I had to include them on this list and in this video just for context, as 2 of the 3 teams happen to be the 2nd and 4th most used teams. In fact, the worst teams on here were the most used, at least 2nd and 4th place. Most popular were the absolute worst. And in some ways, I've got to say, like, especially coming off of the last video that I did that was focused more on Jaden and Nicole, even these last 3 teams, whom I'm telling you right now, did by far the worst, and don't even really feel like talking about here. Most of them kind of outperformed the other 2, or the average of the teams that I was talking about yesterday, and super outperform a lot of the teams that I cut and I didn't even like carry over into this video, because there were a number of unit teams that I reviewed for that video, and again, some of them are first place on defense for both videos has been the Melnia Yuna Jaden combination. Just because it's the most overwhelming all gunner team, and again, all gunner teams are very hit or miss. Pun maybe intended there, but in the, you know, if you can't get to them, they win every time, and if you can get to them, they're very easy to beat. So it's all about how quickly you can rush forward and how much they can push you back. So definitely an interesting type of team composition. I also think that this proves that Yuna may be the more instrumental partner in that combination, because compared to Jaden's teams, her teams are doing better, and even though she probably wants him on the team, I'm just saying it looks like he's probably the less important of the 2 of them. Although she can't be a commander, so I don't know what that means for Arena, but, you know, it is what it is. So, really, I think it's easy to say that Rikku is the strongest character of these, because the way that she's going to be used is going to be very strong, and it's also going to be, if the JP side has indicated anything, she's going to be all over the meta. She's going to be the unit to beat because of her popularity in this collaboration. But that being said, I don't think she's necessarily the best. in that, or the best for all players, in that she seems to have a very specific niche that she wants to play with. Do you have Ashenmont and or Sodley? Probably Ashenmont, Sodley, and or Luciel. Like, those four characters are basically a rotating mess that seems to work pretty well. 3 out of 4 of them, you've got a good team there. And, you know, you could even throw Yuna into that combination. And hey, now we have a cool Grand Arena team that's probably actually pretty good. Also, when are we getting Grand Arena here on Global? I hope that went well on JP. I really hope to see that soon. I would be so excited to have a new way of thinking about PvP in this game, because it would be our first 5-on-5 PvP. I think that would be really cool. But yeah, Yuna is the glue that's holding a lot of this stuff together, so she seems like she would be maybe the best character for most people, even though Rikku is probably even better for some people. And then there's Paine, who is free, so definitely better for people who don't want to spend a lot but want to be able to get one of these units. The thing is, since a lot of people aren't playing her, it's kind of hard to say how good she is. That being said, she definitely seems to be performing pretty well, at least in what I could find that was good out of her teams. That being said, just because of how few people are using her, it's hard to say with confidence that those teams would be successful if they were, say, as popular as Rikku teams. Because some teams are just better when they're niche, and some teams are better when they're everywhere, if that makes sense. I'm not really sure I can explain that idea, so it's probably a good time to end the video. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, I'm probably the only YouTube content creator for War of the Visions, or just the only one that I know of, that actually looks at WotV stats in this way and really comes to these conclusions about videos, and I'm going to keep putting out at least this video series because, I mean, if nothing else, I'm doing it because I'm curious and no one else is. And at the very least, I remain curious. But if you would like to see other types of War of the Visions content, if there's anything that you would like to know about, just leave me a comment, and hopefully I'll see that and be able to answer that for you. Or if it's a good and interesting enough question, or something that I don't know myself and want to prove out for myself, I'll make a video about it. Also, while you're liking, subscribing, and commenting, be sure to ring the bell just so I don't say anything that YouTube finds controversial. I mean, even just talking about quote-unquote gunners or missile units could be a thing that they flag in the transcript and say, hey, maybe we should push this video to less people. And because of that, it really helps if you can ring the bell. That just helps ensure that you get to see all of my content, not just what the censorship algorithm wants to allow you to see. And then, if you're really feeling grateful for this analysis, then check out the link in the description. You can buy my books, which are fiction, fantasy, fun stuff to read, but also you can donate to the channel through Patreon or Ko-fi if you want to say thank you, and give me a couple bucks to get some of these Black Friday bundles. They're pretty good, and we have a lot of good options on at least ways to spend 2K paid viz right now, so thank you in advance for that, and thank everyone for the birthday wishes. If anybody wants to send any presents, I'd still appreciate that, and that would be the way to do it. So, with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. I hope this hasn't been too long, and I'll see you in the next one.